Thank you guys for being here. I'll just go in order of the screen that I'm seeing. We have Neal Schindler. Thank you for hosting us. He's the director of Spokane Area Jewish Family Services and the Spokane Jewish Film Festival. So we're excited, of course, to hear what he has to say about the film. Matthew Kincanon has been a longtime journalist with FāVS News. He has a degree from Gonzaga University, a journalism degree. And he also often writes reviews and critiques on films for us, always from a spiritual or religious lens. Mitch Finley is on the call with us, and he authors the FāVS News Ask a Catholic column, which you've been doing for several years now. And you've also authored several books on Catholicism. And then his partner in crime is here too, Kathy Finley, who studied at Chicago Theological Seminary, which I didn't know. So thank you guys for being here. And I'm Tracy Simmons. I'm the executive director of FāVS News. So for those who are going to tune in later, we're talking about the movie Stay With Us, which is about French comedian Gad Elmaleh, who returns to France after living in the US, where he had converted to Catholicism. And so his Jewish parents were devastated when they found out, and there was pressure on him to renounce his new faith, but Gad stands firm, helping them understand his devotion to figures like the Virgin Mary while reaffirming his Jewish identity and family bonds. His journey raises many questions, and I look forward to hearing our panel's insights on these issues and more. So with that, let's begin. My first question is, how do we balance individual beliefs and faith traditions? So whoever wants to jump into that one can get us started.
Gee, everybody is just piling on.
It looks like, well, why don't we go to Neal first, and then maybe Mitch, you can jump in on that one.
Okay.
Sure. Well, it was when I rewatched the film a couple days ago, watched it for the second time, that I really began to think more about that tension between what a community or a tradition sees as the collective good. Often that's just plain old continuity, keeping the tradition alive. And there can be other components too. But, you know, I think at this point in 2024, we're in, at least in America or in the West, the individual path gets a lot of emphasis. I think individualism is kind of baked into our culture, and not just here. And so I think that a lot of traditions, especially older ones, which Catholicism and Judaism are both relatively old faith traditions, there's much concern about what's good for the tradition, not just what's good for the individual, what's good for the congregation or the community. And I think that's something that makes the specifics of conversion in the film, but also the phenomenon of conversion or considering conversion such a crisis for families, for communities. And in the case of Judaism, because we're a relatively small faith tradition by numbers at this point, there's a kind of sense of collective worry that, you know, we can't afford to lose any more than we already have, both in terms of persecution over many centuries, assimilation, and so forth and so on.
Does anybody want to jump in on that and add to it?
I would like to say a little bit about, I think we are inherently communal, but we live in a culture that, as you mentioned very well, Neal, insists that the individual is the be-all and the end-all. And I think when we look at conversion, which seems like an individual action, it has the ripples, the implications for the community. And I really like the way the film is true to the fact that that communal aspect, I would say, is maybe stronger in the Jewish tradition than in Catholic at times. You know, my background is Irish Catholic, and it would not be as big a deal if somebody said, "What, you want to become Jewish or whatever?" But I do think that it does have those implications for friends and family that this film helps explore nicely. And yet I really like the question that the main character asks late in the film about what if I decide I want to come back? Well, you can't come back because you never left, you know, and I thought that was just wonderful the way that was pointed out.
That's something you hear not infrequently in Jewish circles, and it feels to me a little like a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it's nice to think that you're always welcome. On the other hand, there's a sense of like, you know, you can't ever leave even if you wanted to. So there's two sides to it.
Good point.
Mitch or Matthew, either of you have comments on this question? Or
Well, I remember one of the things that struck me fairly early in the movie was the fact that real early on, after I had finished college, I began to read a good deal on Judaism. And one day it dawned on me, and I said to a friend of mine, you know what? If I wasn't Catholic, I'd love to be Jewish. And there's a lot of truth to that. You know, there's a lot in terms of on the kind of the observable plane rather than what's not there in terms of visuals, is that there is a lot about Catholicism that is there and rarely noticed by lots of people. And let's see, now I was going to say something very profound, and but it flew out the window. So I'll get back to it. Okay.
sounds good. Yeah, no, you're right. There's a lot of really beautiful subtleties in the faith. So talking about, you know, family a little bit, his parents take his conversion very personally, fearing that, you know, they're going to lose him forever if he converts. So I'm curious, you know, I think, you know, Neal, you have a young child, and Mitch and Kathy, I'm not sure. I think you guys have children, right?
We have three
Yeah,
sons.
3 sons. That's right. So I'm curious what you think. Why is a child's change in faith viewed as so threatening by parents sometimes?
You want to jump in, Neal, or?
Yeah, I don't have to start every round, but I'm happy to start this one as well. So first of all, I thought about this today, especially, and I think that on a very personal level, parents can feel as though a conversion or interest in conversion is a rejection of how the child was raised by them, a rejection of their child rearing, a rejection of their core values and their worldview that went into that child rearing. That's a very personal level. I think that, you know, one thing I thought about today is that certainly not for all Jews, or even necessarily for most Jews, but for many Jews, it's hard to separate completely what's personal and what's larger. For example, the dinner scene where it's brought up that how can Jews ever forgive Christians or Catholics for past persecution? You know, this is something that is historical, and it is not necessarily just centuries in the past, but it is hard for some people who are Jewish to simply kind of forgive and forget. And so it feels personal that someone would choose that faith that has been, in the past at least, threatening to Jews and to Judaism over Judaism. That while that may not seem like it's personal, it feels personal. And then there's just concerns about Jewish continuity, about feeling that we gave you this tradition, it's your responsibility to pass it down in a collective and a generational sense.
Yeah. I used to teach a class on Christian marriage at Gonzaga. I taught there, Matthew, probably before you were through it. And when we got to talking about questions like that, I would ask my students, do you think that when your parents raise you in a particular faith tradition that they're loading the dice. And many of my students would say, no, they were glad they were raised in a particular tradition, and those that weren't feel like they'd missed out on something. And one of the phrases Mitch and I used when our kids were little is landscaping the imagination. So we gave them what we treasured and what was most important to us. But that has to be an open-handed give, I think, because you never know what they're going to accept, reject, how they're going to live that out. I wish I could tell you all three of our sons are going to mass every day, every Sunday, and they're not, but I also see a lot of good values in them. And so it doesn't take the shape it does for us. And that was hard through the years. I don't know if it was for you, Mitch, to really accept, but that's just letting them be them. And some of that's the individualism we were talking about earlier, and just kind of letting it be okay.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a lot to give up when something like that happens. But that's not really addressing the point of the movie specifically. I really enjoy. I wish they'd had more material from the central character's role as a comedian. I thought his stuff was just hilarious, as well as wise. And but he could be wise and pass along good ideas to his audience without necessarily demanding that they agree with everything that he said.
I was really struck by the points when he was doing a stand-up bit for the audience, and he said that for Catholics, if they're asked about their Catholicism, they would be more likely to respond, "It's complicated," than maybe some other people of faith. And I was so struck because that's something that I think, or I had thought of as very Jewish, which is to say, you can be Jewish but not religious. You can be Jewish but just spiritual and not religious. You can have been raised Orthodox and be Reform. You can have been raised secular and be conservative. There's and also just there are so many ways to be Jewish, and that Jewish is a cultural identity. All of this stuff, and I thought, well, it's surprising to hear about another faith that I didn't think of in that way because I'm not part of it. That of course there would be all kinds of complicated aspects to many Catholics' idea of what it means to be Catholic. It's just a matter of, it's not my lived experience, but that was refreshing and kind of interesting to hear.
I also thought that the central character was not just converting, but he had this big thing going about the Virgin Mary, and that struck me as odd also. But not only because it's you just don't think that that's going to be a part of anybody's conversion from Judaism to Catholicism, but because it just doesn't seem to be that important. For a lot of Catholics, a devotion to the Virgin Mary is something that was a big, big deal in the 1950s. I mean, really a big deal. Anymore, it's neither here nor there. Some Catholics, it's an important part of their devotional life, if you will. For others, it's I think Kathy was telling me the other day about people that she was talking with. Was it an engaged couple? Yeah, who said that they were really not into that at all. Isn't that right? I forget what exactly.
Well, yeah, I do spiritual direction with a number of people, a couple of whom have been evangelical Protestants, and they are really struggling with how do they make sense out of Marian devotion. And, in some cases getting a little closer to that, but that can often be a stumbling block, I would say, for Protestants. And am I praying to Mary? Am I, what's the stance there? And to have him have this strong experience, which when you sent that interview with him, Tracy, it sounded like maybe his experience wasn't quite as Marian as he portrays in the movie, but just that, almost emotional kind of response to it was just fascinating, because I don't think that's common among a lot of Catholics. Some it is, but like I say, often with Protestant converts, they don't, that isn't what draws them, to say the least.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, he had. Yeah.
you
Yeah,
have
go ahead.
well, there have been situations where I have had to address the whole business of Marian spirituality as a part of Catholicism, and I've had to explain that nobody is required to have a devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's there, it's been there for a long time. Lots of people have made a big deal out of it for centuries. But the bottom line is, if you're not interested in having a devotion to Mary, fine. You don't have to if you don't want to. And I think that's probably one of the things that will eventually come up in any kind of a discussion of conversion or not converting.
I got a big kick out of that scene where Gad's mother is having it out with Mary. Now look at this is my son. You know what it's like to have a son who, is suffering and so on, and back off, lady. I laughed out loud at that, besides his stand-up stuff, because I thought it was just a really interesting way to portray that.
And then his parents' reaction, don't touch the statue of Mary.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
You kind of going off that, the film really blends genres, blending comedy into what could have been a really heavy drama. So I'm curious, maybe Matthew, you want to jump in on this one. How effective do you think this blending of tones was?
Yes, I think it was very effective. So even though I wish there were some more comedic scenes in it, like just more of a stand-up in there, because I felt it would have bounced it out a bit more. But I think it was a really good blend, because I feel without the comedic elements, it would have been a bit too heavy or too dramatic of a story. And by balancing like the heavy, thought-provoking, and reflective moments about faith and family, there were those comedic moments where like he showed that he's thought about this, he's experienced this from both from being Jewish and as well as like contemplating about being Catholic. Like it shows everything's observed and everything he's learned. So yeah, I thought it was actually very well executed, and showed that it's not like, oh, I've just recently thought about being Catholic. It's like he's really taking his time to see if this is what he really wants. Because like the joke he made about being at a Catholic funeral, well, and which was really good, by the way, and that just showed that he attended one, he observed it and paid attention to every little aspect about it, and compared it to a Jewish funeral. And so, but yeah, like I thought it was actually, and also the comedic moments were placed at good times as well. Kind of like we just didn't get like family drama, reflective moment, family drama. It was very well, coordinated.
I feel like it was woven very naturally and organically into the film, and felt like kind of just the air we were breathing and the water we were swimming in. And that reflects, I think, very much the way that in Jewish culture for who knows how long, humor has been a way to explore sensitive topics, difficult or awkward situations, to cope with, difficulty. And I thought, Portnoy's Complaint, Curb Your Enthusiasm, some of the films we're showing this festival, including this one, in community conversations, private conversations within Jewish communities. And I was struck by the moment when he's beginning what seems like it's a retreat of several days at the monastery, or at least an overnight, it seems like. And he's chatting with the monk. I assume that person was a monk. And it seems like he cannot not use humor, even though the monk seems to have zero interest in joking about anything.
Mhm.
God simply can't help it. It's what he knows. It's the way that he copes with new situations, difficult situations, anxiety, whatever's going on. And I felt that he couldn't have made this film and had it not included a good deal of humor. But I also didn't feel that it was a kind of laugh track comedy where the jokes were telegraphed and then they were obvious and they were big and broad. There was a lot of kind of situational humor, I guess I would say, which includes the situation where the mother is talking to the statue of Mary. Absolutely. That's a great example. So I thought it was very effective.
The reviews call this film, quote, surprising and courageous. And I'm curious what about this film makes it both bold and conventional in its approach to the subject matter?
It's a good question. I liked the fact that it helped me think about both Jewish identity and Catholic identity in new sorts of ways, and stuff that also resonated with what I do know in my bones, kind of like you were saying, Neal. And also, I was pleased that he made reference a couple of different times to Cardinal Lustiger, which most people might not know about, who was raised Jewish and became Catholic and then became a cardinal. And I remember being, this is paradoxical, not about this. So the monks there were Trappist monks, and Mitch and I regularly go to a Trappist monastery for a retreat. And they don't anymore, but they used to, while the meals were silent, like they were pointing out, read a book out loud. And I remember well when there was a book written by Cardinal Lustiger that they were reading, and I was very impressed with his take on things and his, very much being this, being able to be bigger than the dividing lines, and I can do both, and it doesn't need to be an either or and all of that. And so I thought bringing a figure like that in was a really welcome aspect to the film.
It was, and I think a lot of people would not realize that this was a real historical person,
Right.
and you could do worse than to look up a few of his books, I suppose.
The quotes, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it impressed me too about the mentioning on the cardinal. And maybe I should some background. I was raised Protestant, Free Methodist, and in the charismatic Assemblies of God. And then about a couple of decades ago, online, Jews for Judaism, and learned quite a bit there. I've been in and out of Temple Beth Shalom maybe over 20 years. And last year I did an intro to Judaism online. I'm not sure I'm going to convert, but I could kind of feel his kind of quandary back and forth. That's what I saw.
Yeah.
And what was funny to me, he was practicing getting baptized in a swimming pool. And then when he saw what we saw in the Catholic Church was a bowl of water, and they were just, scooping up some water and spilling it over this guy's head. And from what I know, the mikvah, or dipping in the water, is in Judaism too. And it's both male and female, but mostly the women, frequently. Maybe I should stop. I could talk for an hour, and then I've got to get out of the library here in about 30 minutes.
Well, thank you.
And the mikvah, I'm no expert, but it's basically a purification ritual, and it does involve water. And there is a mikvah in Spokane. I believe the only proper official mikvah is at the Chabad house, if I'm not mistaken. But also any free-flowing body of water, I believe, can serve as a mikvah as well.
Neal or Matthew, what about this film do you think makes it bold or unconventional? Did you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I thought it particularly what made it bold was the ending, because given how the plot was going, you would think he would be baptized and become Catholic, and there would be some kind of family unity in that way. But when he backs out at the very last second, and with that final quote from the cardinal, kind of really encapsulating what the entire film's about, I felt that was a very different and bold kind of ending, because it shows that because when he's in the church, he loves the part of him that's gone into Catholicism, but he knows who he is at his very foundational core. He's learned more about him, Judaism, and his family through learning about Catholicism. And so I thought that's what made it very bold. It's one faith gave him insights and a deeper understanding of the faith that he was raised on.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that he was, well, the film seemed to almost take for granted that that what he was attracted to in Catholicism was sort of the summary of it all. There's nothing negative about Catholicism that you might want to have second thoughts about. And that reminded me of a situation I was in one time where a guy had decided to become Catholic, and he said to me that he was pretty sure he was going to convert to Catholicism after being raised all of his life as first a Baptist and then a Quaker. And I said, "You're going to become Catholic?" And he said, "Yeah, I think so." And I said, "But why?" So there's a lot about Catholicism that is, it can be difficult to get along with sometimes. You might want to take a second look at this, because there's nothing about it that is perfect. There's a lot about it that isn't perfect, as a matter of fact. And this seems to have struck him as a whole new insight at the time. Nobody had said to him, "Why? Why can't you think of something more interesting to do?" But at the same time, I had to tell him, "Well, I hope it works out for you. I certainly would not give up my own Catholicism, but at the same time, there's a lot about it that just drives me nuts sometimes."
I think that's for any faith, probably.
I think so.
I'll just add that to my knowledge, this film is circulating throughout the Jewish Film Festival circuit. It's probably going elsewhere too, but a film that broaches the issue of Jews contemplating conversion to a form of Christianity, whether it's Catholicism or another form, it may not be completely taboo in Jewish circles, but it feels like it's a discussion that either you don't want to be having, or you want to be having only in kind of a worrying way, like worried way, not in a curious way, or a way where you're somewhat emotionally removed. And I think that the family members who are quite perturbed, even though, of course, part of the reason they're perturbed is that they're his family members, it's also because they're Jewish, and the whole concept is very strange and concerning to them. And in the article that I think most or all of us read, God reflects on the fact that in France, quite a number of Jews were either offended by the movie, or it didn't really resonate well with them. And I think that it's just bold to raise this issue of, you can be Jewish and want something more or something different, and you may or may not, quote unquote, leave Judaism to find it. But the faith you're raised in is meant to meet all your needs, so that when, I think it's his father, someone tells God during the film, well, you haven't explored all the aspects of it. And it's like, well, who has, first of all, but also there may be something outside of Judaism that speaks to you in a way that you're not able to find. During an earlier time in my life, I explored Buddhism. There are a lot of Jews who do this. Buddhism's theology doesn't feel as threatening to Jewish theology the way that Christian theology can feel to many Jewish people, because it seems like you have to choose one or the other. You can't theologically be both, right? There's Jewish mysticism, there's mindfulness and meditative Judaism, but it isn't something that I was taught when I was a child. And so perhaps now, when children are taught Judaism in a religious setting, they're given a fuller picture of what Judaism can mean. I hope so, because the Judaism I was taught wasn't going to meet all my needs spiritually. But that doesn't mean Judaism can't meet all of someone's needs. It just depends what you were shown from it and what you're able to find in it.
Yeah. I was going to ask if one can find meaning in multiple faiths. Why or why not? If anyone wants to expand on what Neal just kind of already answered.
Well, when I talk about spirituality and religion, meaning a religious tradition, I think whether it's Judaism or Christianity or whatever, within that, there are all kinds of, as I see it, individual spiritualities. But then I think you raise an interesting point, Neal, in terms of, I do know a few Catholics who have taken on some Buddhist meditation practices and so on. Well, Thomas Merton was a famous example of connecting, the Christian mystical tradition with Buddhism and so on. And I think that there are ways in the world in which we live today where, I grew up, you probably did too, Neal, where you did not ever set foot in another church, and I remember going to a neighbor's Protestant wedding and thinking, I hope God isn't going to strike me dead for being here, and we're in a whole different world than that. And so I see the students I used to teach, for example, who know and should know lots about various traditions. And then some of those traditions are going to really speak to them and enrich them. And some of them are going to feel too tight and constricting. And so I think this is a real important issue to take a look at. And how do we, without kind of ending up with something that's an amalgam and kind of lukewarm everything, how do we take some of the good aspects of various traditions and take those on when they fit?
Matthew, as someone who's gone through some religious studies and someone who writes about religion, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so like when it comes to finding meaning in multiple faiths, so that's something I personally have gone through because so I went to a Catholic education my whole life. I went to St. Al's School, G Prep, then Gonzaga University. And also like on my family, like my one of my parents is agnostic and one of my parents was raised Protestant, but then uh kind of like moved away from that yeah, just later on. But and so, but me, like with the things I was taught, there were just things about Catholicism that I just didn't fully agree with. Like, and the biggest thing with me was hell is eternal, because I don't firmly believe that at all. And because it's like, well, because I've been taught, God's a loving God. So then, and I wrote an article about this, Tracy. I don't remember if you remember that one, but yeah. So it's just like, why would a loving God like just punish us for all eternity in one place? I just never understood. And so, and one day when I was in a world literature class at G Prep, Father Vance, he showed us a documentary about how different faiths view hell. And when we got to Islam, they talked about how they saw it as temporary and that uh, God's wrath doesn't last forever. And so that just got me thinking. I thought, yeah, that's actually more in line with what I believe. And then for a while, I just because I didn't know of any denominations that believed in that, and so I just went as non-denominational for a while. And then someone told me about universalism, and I thought, oh, well, what's that? And they told me how it's denomination that believes and all people can receive salvation of God. And yeah, so it's just so kind of like learning about how like just parts of Islam kind of like helped me find my way to like my own denomination in that way. And yes, I uh, just really like that whole aspect of like multiple faiths helping you find like put you on the path sorry, the path that you need to get to where you can find your inner peace in yourself.
Yeah, that's well
I
said.
think, yeah, I think a lot of my students would relate to that, Matthew. And they're not even out of Jesuit school.
Well, I find it fascinating that you would go through Catholic schools with your parents' backgrounds. How did that happen?
Oh, so we went to St. Al's because the only reason why we went there was because it was a religious school because my mom really valued that, but also like it's the only school that would have me and my brother together because every other school was like, oh no, we can't have siblings together. So, and me and my siblings are all very, very close. Like we're like this. And so just the thought of us all be separated, my parents were like, no, not a chance. So that's how we made our way to St. Al's.
Interesting. Wow.
Well, thanks for sharing that story, Matthew.
Of course.
So I guess to wrap up, if you guys all want to kind of jump in on this last question, is just what are your ultimate takeaways from the film?
Something that Matthew said actually made me think of this little, it's like a little subplot in the movie where God meets Raymond. So I guess we would call him Raymond, but he's the older man who Agnes I think is how it's pronounced. She's looking after him, right? She's taking care of him once in a while at least. And God starts to have conversations with Raymond. And toward the very end of the movie, I think it is, Raymond says that he can acknowledge that the conspiracy theories he believed about the Illuminati and Macron, the French prime minister, and all these things, that they're wrong. French president, whatever he is, that they're wrong. The conspiracy theories he's been really focused on are not right. They're not correct. And he says that believing in them, he says, it worried me, and at the same time, it was reassuring. I understood the world. And then now he says, I understand, I don't understand anything. And, I think when I think about why would someone believe in hell when it's not a pleasant or, inspiring thing to believe in, it would deeply concern you, but at least things would be clear, right? You would have a sense of like, there's right, there's wrong, there's good, there's bad, there's this route, there's that route. Got it. And I think that one of the things I think about with regard to the larger plot of the film, or the larger issues of conversion, or trying to figure out what you believe and what that means for you, it's very reassuring to feel certain. And at the end, God says to have faith is to have doubt, which is something you hear all the time, but not everyone is able to hold that doubt. It's not comfortable for a lot of folks to have faith, but also to have doubt. So that's a pretty common theme, I think, in film and books and lots of other art related to faith. So he also says something I had heard before too, which is we can ask ourselves if living with the idea of God adds something to our lives or brings us joy, even though we may never feel we can know for sure if there's a God. And that's also a nuanced and an interesting insight. So those are things I really found to be memorable.
Anyone else want to offer their ultimate takeaways? Kathy, yeah.
Well, you kind of, said things I was going to say, Neal. I do have down to belief is to have doubts and so on. And I, besides doing spiritual direction with various individuals, one woman is training to be a spiritual director within the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, the SEAL program. And she said, but, I'm not sure this is going to fit for me. I'm not so sure about this. I'm not so sure about that. And I'm saying, join the club. So I think it's really, it may be a common statement, but I think it's something that we need to hear and be reassured of over and over again. And I thought it was dear in the movie that these family members who wanted on the one hand to support Gad and on the other hand wanted to stay firm in their traditions were willing to overcome that and just be there and support him. And I thought that was really wonderful too.
I found it extremely poignant that his father stays outside the church but keeps the door open. I feel like that has so much symbolic oomph to it. I really found that very poignant.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like the way the movie just as a whole was able to ask questions and raise doubts, and at the same time not insist that there is anything such as absolute certainty about anything. And I think that the film does that without insisting that the viewer make a choice between what the main character is doing and what the other people in the film are doing. You don't have to choose one or the other. It's one of the things that I have on more than one occasion in working on a book on Catholicism, I'll end up saying Catholic faith is not either or, it's both and. So that it's not as if anybody has to make a final choice about anything. For the whole business of the existence of hell, the fact of the matter is that there is no absolute teaching about that. It's just a question of what do you think about that? Do you want to live? Is it important to you for some reason to believe that that there is a place of eternal death and suffering and punishment just because you've been bad? which makes no sense whatsoever. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that that's the way it is. But the movie does a good job of kind of leaving us all there with our questions and our ways of looking at things from different angles, and saying at the same time, all of this is good.
Matthew, any closing remarks? Or certainly don't have to, but
Yes. Yes. So, kind of like my final thoughts of just about the movie was like, kind of like touches on what, Neal, Kathy, everyone has really touched on, is like, I just feel like this movie at its very core is like just kind of like the path to understanding who you are, because like it's not a smooth going, easy path, and it's not always pleasant, because there are things you come across with, or there are things you think about doing that you think will help you, and some people will agree with it, others will not, and you may not even fully understand it yourself, and you may doubt, you may feel very confident at one point, but like what matters is that at the very end, regardless of what path you take, as long as you find out who you truly are at the end, and you get this deep uh, understanding that you feel in your soul, well, then like that's really what's important in the end. Because other people can have their thoughts and opinions about your journey through life, whether it's faith, career, or just even just life in general. Well, it's like what matters is that you feel deep down inside that you understand who you are in your identity.
well, thank you guys. This was a wonderful film. Thank you, Neal, for this opportunity to talk about it. And David, yes, please.
Yeah, let me have a few minutes, or one. Now, I watched this with my friend Kathy online at her apartment on her Wi-Fi. And what was funny to her was the parents said, well, whatever you do is okay with us. And she said, well, they're lying. That's not true. And then he's kind of doing the same thing to them. And then they catch him on it and tell him he's lying. But at the end, I got the impression that they were still family. They did accept his decision. And what struck me too was his fascination with Mary, because my baby brother converted Catholic, and he likes the Virgin Mary. And he'll once called me up and he wanted to pray for me in the name of Mary, or however you call it. So I let him. And of course, it didn't seem to have any effect on me, but it probably helped. He probably felt good. And from the course I had last year, one rabbi made the claim, Islam, Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, as he put it, and Christianity are siblings. They're not, kind of one after the other, chronological descendants of each other, because all have more truly descended from Temple Judaism. And that's kind of the impression I'm getting from one of the characters in there. Apparently was a rabbi. He's saying, well, Miriam, or Mary, is a Jew. So was Jesus. And I often think, well, Jesus probably, today, his jaw would drop when he sees has developed after him. And I like the cardinal. It's like, yeah, he converted to Catholicism, but kind of in the end, he brought a lot of his Judaism, you might say, or spirit with him. It's still there. You can't really get rid of it. But I don't like the idea that, well, once you're in, you're in. It's like that kind of like a blood thing, It's like this Russian guy, what's he call it, Jewish Cafe over in Chicago. He says, it's in your identity papers in Russia. From birth, you're Jew. And it was probably the same thing like in Germany. They labeled you. You're a Jew, whatever you did. And often, I think in history, if you're Jewish and you convert to Catholicism, a converso, you're not quite trusted. And that was what a lot of the Inquisition was about, was testing these conversos. You know, were they pulling the curtains shut at night, on especially Friday night? What were they doing? And the Protestant upbringing I had was very clear. You know, there's a hell, and it's terrible. But what I finally decided, well, that's just evil. It's not just. There's nothing you can do to earn eternal life, and there's nothing you can do to earn eternal hell either. And I wish the video got more into why he got into it, but that was probably the best they could do, was he really liked Virgin Mary.
Well, thank you for sharing your insights. We appreciate that. And,
Yeah.
it was nice to hear your voice, and it was nice to see your faces, everyone else. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the film festival. Neal, is there anything you want to say about the rest of the festival? Because I know you have a few more days that it's going on.
Yes. Well, first of all, I do want to thank all of you for participating. You know, I think that for anyone who has seen the film and does check this conversation, this panel discussion out on our website, I think it will really add a lot of richness to, you know, the understanding that people might have of all the themes and so forth. We have a couple of in-person screenings coming up this weekend, Saturday evening at 7 and Sunday at 2. We're showing films in person, and then we're online until February 8th. That's the last day. So there's actually another week left, and you can attend in person or online. I would encourage anyone viewing and all of those here to consider checking out some of the other films. But if this is the only one you see, this is a good one to see. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful night, and good luck with the rest of the festival, Neal.
Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate that. All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Have a good night.
Yeah.
Hey,
Wave,
thanks,
wave.
everybody.
Bye.
All right. Good night, Dave.
Good night.
Good night, David. Good night, Chet.